Call the subcommittee to order. I'd like to welcome everyone to this hearing on green transportation infrastructure, challenges to access and implementation. The committee has heard a lot of testimony over the last 5 months on high-tech methods to mitigate climate change. Today, I want to hear about simpler methods for protecting our lakes, rivers, and oceans. I've invited today's witnesses because they each give a unique perspective in the field of green transportation infrastructure. Now, this is a term that is not necessarily well known outside of environmental circles. Simply put, green transportation infrastructure is the use of materials, methods for construction of roads, highways, and parking lots that minimize environmental impact. Today, we will hear about the materials and technologies that specifically contribute to the minimization of non-point source water pollution. Runoff is a major contributor to water pollution, especially from roads and parking lots, which concentrate oil, gasoline, heavy metals, and other pollutants, which then flow unimpeded into our nation's waterways. For example, a 1-acre parking lot produces 16 times the runoff of a 1-acre meadow. In recent years, local governments and companies and private citizens have been working to develop simple yet innovative solutions that integrate control of non-point source water pollution into the existing infrastructure. The results, a common sense, low cost, low maintenance system that reduces pollution, prevents flooding, protects ecosystems, and maintains a more natural hydrological environment. I'd like to thank our witnesses for testifying today. Our challenge today is not the development of new technologies, it is to get people to start using the technologies that we do have. I hope that at the end of this hearing that we've learned a lot about technologies for controlling non-point source water pollution that can be integrated into transportation infrastructure. And I am shortening my opening statement in the interests of adjusting to the flex of our committee schedule and our floor schedule, and I'd like now, and I will submit my full statement into the record. I'd like to recognize my good colleague from Georgia, Dr. Gingrey, the ranking member of this committee, for his opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I thank the witnesses. I apologize to the witnesses. I had memorized my 18-page opening statement, and in the interest of time, my staff has redacted it so much now that I'm going to have to read it because it's a different statement. But thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for having this important hearing. Roads and highways let people in the smallest towns reach out to the largest cities. They let urban workers escape to more tranquil homes outside of the city. And they let mom-and-pop store in Cedartown, Georgia, in my district, ship their wares easily, quickly, and affordably. In short, they form the fabric that keeps this country connected and competitive. Unfortunately, roads and highways have also left an indelible mark on our environment. Today, I'm looking forward to hearing our distinguished panel discuss how we can further reduce, maybe even negate, environmental degradation associated with our transportation system. From reviewing your testimony, it appears that green or sustainable highway technologies could be a win-win for everyone involved. However, it's also clear that we're not quite there yet. And I'd like to close by again thanking you for coming before the committee today to discuss this very, very important topic. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and starting a dialogue with you on how we can improve our nation's environment and support our critical highway infrastructure. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gingrey. Our first witness is Ms. Gloria Shepard, who is the Associate Administrator for Planning, Environment, and Realty at the Federal Highway Administration. Let's see. We also have Mr. Ben Grumbles, who, in addition to being the Assistant Administrator of the Office of Water at the Environmental Protection Agency, is an alumni of the Science and Technology Committee staff. Welcome back. I also have a special welcome for our next two witnesses who both come from Oregon. City Commissioner Sam Adams was elected to the Portland City Council in 2005. He oversees the Office of Transportation and the Bureau of Environmental Services. He has taken the lead in developing a citywide Green Streets policy, which requires Green Street development for all newly constructed or reconstructed roadways. Welcome, Sam. Mr. Dan Huffman is the Managing Director for National Resources for the National Ready Mixed Concrete Association and also comes from Portland, Oregon. Our final witness is Mr. Hal Kassoff, who is a Senior Vice President at Parsons Brinckerhoff, a leading construction firm. And with that, Ms. Shepard, please proceed.
Chairman Wu, Ranking Member Gingrey, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the Federal Highways Administration's efforts to advance environmentally sensitive transportation infrastructure. I am pleased to have the opportunity to testify about ways in which FHWA is advancing a shift in the focus of the highway community from simply mitigating environmental impacts to proactively contributing to environmental enhancements. To fulfill this responsibility, we work closely with our partners at the federal, state, and local levels to provide coordinated national research and to deliver research results from training and technical assistance. Minimizing damage from and mitigating negative impacts of transportation facilities on the human and natural environment are always significant considerations for every federal aid-funded highway project, from the initial planning and project development throughout the design, construction, operation, and maintenance stages. Our state partners are learning from experiences that introducing environmentally sound technologies and construction considerations early in the project development process can produce savings in cost and time and can reduce future remediation expenses. As more transportation and environmental research is being undertaken by a diverse array of organizations, there is a growing need for organizational approaches to make the results more visible. FHWA participates in a variety of research coordination efforts, including the Surface Transportation Environment and Planning Cooperative Research Program, better known as STECREP, our National Highway courses, our local and tribal technical assistance programs, and through development of case studies to showcase best practice and innovative techniques. FHWA is also becoming an active participant in the green infrastructure planning workshops developed by a number of resource and regulatory agencies in cooperation with the Conservation Fund. We are a leading partner in the Mid-Atlantic Green Highway Partnership. FHWA is actively working with the interagency teams of the Green Highway Partnerships in the area of stormwater runoff management, recycling, and reuse of industrial byproduct materials, and conservation and ecosystem management. In our efforts to promote technologies that mitigate damage and impacts to the environment from highway construction and operations, we have made the issue of managing highway stormwater runoff of a particular focus. While highway runoffs may be a potential threat, there are a number of highly effective measures, structural and non-structural, available to treat runoff before it actually reaches any receiving waters. Site-specific practices remain important treatment options, but we are increasingly focusing our practice and techniques that look at ecosystem-level impacts. And selecting the most appropriate management practice, FHWA encourages states to study the amount of time, type of their highway runoff, and availability of land and the physical characteristics on the site before designing any control strategies for a specific area. One challenge that's facing us as we work to expand acceptance and the use of environmentally sensitive technologies is the lack of a sufficient track record illustrating the costs versus the benefits of various technologies. The business case has to be made that new transportation technologies can be utilized safely in an environmentally sensitive manner. Context-sensitive solutions that fully integrate safety into the project development process can ensure both environmental and highway safety benefits. When appropriately applied, green transportation technologies and practices such as highway infrastructure to mitigate stormwater runoff, beneficial reuse of industrial byproducts materials, and context-sensitive solutions not only help to avoid or mitigate negative environmental impacts on highway construction, but can produce safety enhancements and economic savings as well. Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I will be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shepard. Mr. Grumbles, welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Congressman Gingrey and Congressman Ehlers, Congressman Baird. It's great to be back before this committee. It's an honor, and it's even greater opportunity to discuss and to promote green infrastructure for transportation, for healthier watersheds, as the wave of the future for this country as we look at the water challenges, the transportation challenges. I, too, will be brief and summarize my testimony, but the major point here is that the U.S. EPA, in collaboration with other agencies such as Federal Highways and also governmental and non-governmental partners, are advancing this concept of green infrastructure like never before, because we see through technology, innovation, and collaboration, it is a sustainable way forward to also accelerate environmental progress. This is a very important part of our 4 pillars of sustainability when it comes to infrastructure, and that pillar of a watershed approach. The administrator's objective is to change the way America views and values infrastructure, not just emphasize the critical importance of it, but also find environmentally sensitive approaches. And that's why we're so excited about green infrastructure. And in the transportation arena in particular, we're very enthused about the Green Highways Partnership. The EPA Region 3 and the Federal Highways and many partners have been involved over the last couple of years in an innovative collaboration where we pursue technologies, porous pavements and concrete, practical and protective wetland strategies, ways to address one of the fundamental challenges and concerns to watersheds across the country, and that is stormwater runoff, stormwater contamination. So we're very enthused about green highways and green infrastructure transportation methods. I want to just emphasize that for us, as you pointed out in your statement, the term itself is not a rigid definition. For us, green infrastructure is systems or practices that use or mimic natural processes to focus on vegetation, infiltration, evapotranspiration, and reclamation and reuse of excess stormwater. In this watershed, where we are right now in the capital, in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, we know that over the last 10 years, population has increased 7%, and the amount of impervious surface has increased 41%. We know that has adverse environmental impacts. We're committed to working together with you and other committees and with colleagues outside of government and agencies to advance green infrastructure concepts. What I want to mention as well is that the agency has entered into some significant memorandums and agreements. One of them, on April 19th, the administrator of EPA entered into an agreement with the Natural Resources Defense Council, the National Association of Clean Water Agencies, Low Impact Development Center, and also Association of State and Interstate Water Pollution Control Administrators to advance green infrastructure concepts, to use rain gardens and green roofs, protect wetlands, come up with innovative approaches, different types of concrete that help reduce concerns about stormwater pollution, and we're committed to following through on that important effort. I, too, have also signaled to the various EPA regions that green infrastructure is a priority for the National Water Program, and so we're going to be taking advantage of your leadership in having this hearing and moving forward with approaches, ways to reduce barriers. Sometimes the barriers may be due to local regulation. Sometimes it's just due to people not understanding that they can have healthier watersheds and transportation systems by using these innovative technologies. One thing I did also want to point out that a very important effort that has been critical to EPA's interest in and approach on working with others on green infrastructure is the NRDC Rooftops to Rivers report. One of the greatest challenges in this country, in addition to stormwater runoff from transportation systems, is sewer overflows and stormwater pollution. And so this report provides green strategies for controlling stormwater and combined sewer overflows, and it identifies various areas in the country, including Portland, Oregon, and other cities that are showing leadership. So, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to answering questions that you and your colleagues have and to working with you to promote green infrastructure transportation and healthier watersheds across the country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grumbles. We have just been notified of a long series of votes, and I understand that one or more of the government witnesses may have to leave at 3:30. So I'm going to seek unanimous consent to ask the first two witnesses questions, and hearing no objections, so ordered. Mr. Grumbles, I'm going to confine myself to one or two questions and then turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Gingrey. I very much appreciate your memorandum written this March supporting green streets and green efforts. And I want to ask you what other guidance can or does EPA Office of Water provide to its regions, to communities interested in green transportation infrastructure development, and how does your office collaborate with regional EPA offices?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The National Water Program is excited about a couple opportunities in particular. One is what we're learning in the Mid-Atlantic on the Green Highways Program, this unique collaboration with federal highways and with other state and local government and private sector entities. We're looking to share with other EPA regions, and that can be through guidance or different materials. We're also very focused on working with our Enforcement and Compliance Assistance Office as they look at communities that have sewer overflow challenges or stormwater problems, looking for opportunities to incorporate various practices that reflect a green infrastructure approach. It's also very important to the National Water Program that it be an important component of our overall strategy on wetlands protection. Gaining, not simply maintaining wetlands in the United States is a critically important part of the infrastructure. And then, of course, as this committee knows and is focused on the importance of technology and continuing to evaluate different technologies and approaches, it's important to us to work with our research office and with the private sector and other agencies to advance the science and prove the environmental results of so many of these exciting green infrastructure transportation technologies.
Well, Mr. Grumbles, if there's anything that this Congress, this committee, or this subcommittee can do to assist you in a more uniform acceptance of a green streets approach across the regions, we'd be delighted to do that. And with that, I'd like to turn over time to my colleague, Dr. Gingrey from Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And in the interest of Mr. Grumbles' time in particular, and also I'll ask Ms. Shepard a question, and then hopefully we'll get to hear from the other witnesses and question them as well. My staff was briefing me on the hearing earlier today, and were telling me about some of the technologies and the things that could be done. I said, well, gee, I don't think that'll work. And it was, Mr. Grumbles, in regard to the issue of regular maintenance of things like porous concrete and taking care of the vegetation and the bioswales. And so my question is, because I'm concerned, and then there is a recurring criticism of some of the green transportation practices, is the need for this regular maintenance. And I mentioned the vacuuming of porous pavement, or attending to the vegetation in the bioswales. When you're reviewing technologies like this for potential inclusion into a best management practices, are the O&M costs estimated by the EPA? Do you look at these things and say, well, what it will cost to maintain it? And in fact, even if it's put in place, will the cooperation be there? I mean, if you've got a vacuum concrete once every couple of years, or dig out and replant the vegetation every 5 years, are state and local folks going to do that? And what's the cost to comply?
Your question is just right on target about what are the practical aspects and ramifications of some of these emerging technologies. And I would just say a couple things. One, EPA is focused on environmental results more than on particular technologies, and we don't, through our ETV program, we don't certify particular technologies. We do evaluate them, and our goal is to get out the best information on various technologies and work with others and work at the grassroots level to give them the information so that they can choose which technologies are the most effective and practical. And you are exactly right that as communities and as EPA look at the range of options, because there is no one-size-fits-all. It depends on the local circumstances and climate and geographic factors and community needs. It's important to give the biggest possible list and options and then provide information. You're right. Sometimes as we move towards greater vegetated green approaches in some areas, that may not be as practical given the terrain or the climate. But some of the experts who are on the panel who have a real hands-on experience about some of the different technologies are informing us and everyone else.
Well, it's intriguing, and as I say, I mean, the highway departments and the various states, and mine in particular, you know, they're concerned about repainting the lines and making sure the shoulders are safe and things like that. So even if you put some of these things in place, you worry about the M&O. Ms. Shepard, the training and technology transfer. In the end, the implementation of these technologies is going to require the local developers and the planning boards to accept their use. It's kind of in the same line of reasoning that I had with Mr. Grumbles. Ms. Shepard, in your testimony, you mentioned two programs that provide training and technical assistance to individuals, the National Highway Institute and the Local Technology Assistance Program. How many individuals actually participate in these programs during the course of the year? And what are the two key differences in these programs?
The NHI, the National Highway Institute, is the training arm of the Federal Highway Administration, and what that particular part of the organization does is it develops training based on the specific subject matter discipline. So in this area, it would be the environment and stormwater management specifically, and for your question, it would be related to things like O&M and all the things that are associated with stormwater management. We are developing a course now on environmental considerations and the construction, meaning stormwater management area. We work with the states to host, and the states are welcome to invite the local governments in to participate in that training. So the states actually sponsor the training in connection with our National Highway Institute, and they're free because the states are actually supporting the training. They're actually able to open up seats to that training to their local parts, their local governments within the state. And in addition, the Local Transportation Assistance Program, there's 58 in the country, and that includes Puerto Rico, and there's multiple LTAPs in a number of states, and there's 7 TTAPs throughout the country, mostly obviously located in the western part of the state. Those and a lot of them are through the university systems, and a lot of them are through the state, and some of them are through the state highway administrations. Those programs are well attended because what they do is they actually reach out to the locals, the grassroots organizations, the local state highway administrations, and their transportation professionals. They find out what the needs of those specific areas are, and they try to gear training and technical assistance, technical deployment, based on what those local governments say their priorities are. So it's a very much hands-on approach with the local government.
Ms. Shepherd and Mr. Grumbles, thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I took way beyond my 5 minutes, but I talked slow. It wasn't their fault.
No, we appreciate the gentility of the gentleman from Georgia, and we are down to about 3 minutes before the vote, but I understand that Dr. Ehlers has a question, and we'd like to get this done before we take a potentially significant break.
I'm from Michigan. We don't talk much faster than Georgia. But, just very quickly, want to make a point. I'm on the Transportation Committee, too. When we did the last reauthorization, TLU, I was chairing this subcommittee, and we fought very, very hard to get more research money into the Department of Transportation. We did not succeed very well. And I'm wondering, since you're involved in this area, I found it totally absurd that we have a multi-billion-dollar industry, so to speak. I don't know of any other multi-billion-dollar industry in the world that spends so little on research as the Department of Transportation does. Have things improved at all? Are you dedicating more funding to research or not?
What we do is, since you've acknowledged that the transportation research funds were not there as they had been historically, what we've done is we've tried to do a lot more cooperative efforts with our partners, like the states, AASHTO, for example, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. As you know, sir, the states are required through the state planning and research programs. 2% of all the major categories in Safety Lou are set aside for research, and we pass that to the states. Of that money, the state has to set aside 25% of that money that can only be spent on research and development. So what we do is we try to pool, albeit our limited funding, with the states and their funds to try to address their priority areas. We also try to work with the Transportation Research Board through their National Cooperative Highway Research Program and a number of other efforts. So what we've done is, because of the limitations, we've learned to reach out and try to pool funding together to address some of these major issues, and try to increase the flexibilities of moving funding around, given the limited amount of research revenues. So you're right, there is a significant shortage of that's dedicated to research, but we try to make the best use that we can of what we have.
Well, thank you for the slight bit of encouragement, and I'm going to leave it up to you to raise the funds even more. Thank you very much.
Could I just add something?
Well, Mr. Grumbles, perhaps we could take your additional comment in the record. We are somewhat under 30 seconds for this first of 5 votes, and I want to apologize to all the witnesses and the attendees. We will have to step away for however long it takes us to cast these 5 votes, and then we will reconvene. Committee's in recess.
No.
I want to thank the forbearance of the witnesses and the attendees. At this point, I'd like to recommence testimony with Commissioner Sam Adams. Sam, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member and committee members, for the opportunity to share with you some of the lessons learned and barriers that stand in the way and uncertainties that stand in the way of further application in the City of Portland, and in talking to my colleagues in other cities and local governments across the United States, selectively sort of the challenges that they have told me in terms of greater implementation of green transportation technology. I also want to acknowledge that your leadership on this issue, not just here in Congress, but also your willingness to go out with us as Transportation Commissioner and see the projects up close and personal. Very grateful. Thank you. The City of Portland gets 37 inches of rain annually, and that translates into about 17 billion gallons of transportation-related stormwater runoff. Oregon, Portland specifically, it rains many days of the year, but the number of inches and the amount of stormwater produced by the transportation system is commensurate with a lot of cities across the United States. Sometimes it comes in thunder showers, sometimes in snow, but many cities across the United States have the challenge or opportunity to deal with stormwater. In the City of Portland, starting in 1994, when we came under the jurisdiction of the State Department of Environmental Quality and the EPA for sewer overflow discharges into the Willamette River, we have been working very aggressively to do the research and development and the experimentation and the proving of transportation-related green stormwater approaches. It really took a changing not only just of technology, but really of outlook, that up to that point, stormwater had largely been treated as a waste product or ignored. Stormwater was either piped directly in through the treated system or directly into the river, which means if it hit the river, it was warm, it was dirty, and it was fast-moving. Not the kind of stream inflows to the Willamette River, which is our major river, that we were looking for. Instead, sort of trying to turn things around and doing it in a way that could save money to local ratepayers. Instead, our goal was to get stormwater to percolate into the ground as much as possible. 30% of our main river and most of our watersheds come up from below. And if the water comes up from below, it tends to be cool, clean, and it recharges the river in the most beneficial way. A couple of examples of just pictures of the kinds of stormwater technologies that mimic, as you heard from Mr. Grumbles, that mimic the natural environment. This is a curb extension. All three of these examples are retrofits of the existing system in the City of Portland. We have 4,000 miles of streets and roads. That's a curb extension in a residential area. This is actually a sidewalk planter that is in use in downtown Portland, taking a very narrow part of the sidewalk in the street and turning it into a functioning swale. And then the third one is an example of Pervious pavers. Your next witness is going to talk about Pervious Concrete, so I don't want to steal any of his thunder, but we use that as well. These are Pervious pavers in the parking strip. In terms of what stands in the way of more application of these things, it's been touched upon. But it really is, when, like me, when you're running a local government agencies, in my case, I'm responsible for transportation, as you mentioned. Environmental services is a euphemism for the sewer agency. We don't have the luxury of taking risks that can come with unclear federal regulations. In the City of Portland, we push further than most, but most cities won't do that. And so some of the barriers that we have faced and that I hear from my colleagues around the country is a lack of alignment of regulatory policies with green infrastructure initiatives with EPA and with the transportation agencies on the federal level. There has been some positive forward motion in terms of approving green technologies for inclusion into federally funded projects, but as detailed in my testimony, we feel like there is a long ways to go. And because there is a lack of federal standards, it means that a lot of local governments simply will not choose to try to build the green stormwater facilities because they don't know what the rules of success are. Even though in the city of Portland we're achieving between a 20 and 60% reduction in green stormwater facilities than if we tried to treat that same amount of stormwater. So, appreciate the opportunity to testify. Look forward to questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Huffman, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Wu and Ranking Member Gingrey and Congressman Ellers. Mr. Chairman, as a resident of your district, I'm especially pleased to appear before you today to discuss the environmental benefits of pervious concrete pavements. My testimony will provide a brief overview of the properties of pervious concrete, some real-world applications, and industry efforts to enhance its broad utilization. Pervious concrete is a leading-edge infiltration technology. Its limited use in the United States in pavement began about 25 years ago, and primarily in Florida. Pervious concrete can be a major element of low-impact development and could provide for substantial water harvesting. It already has been accepted by EPA as a recommended BMP, and the U.S. Green Building Council's LEED program allows the use of pervious concrete to contribute towards certification. Pervious concrete is a performance-engineered structural material using the constituents of conventional Portland cement concrete, only with little or no sand in the mixture, allowing for a 15 to 30% air void factor. Taking advantage of the decreased density, pervious concrete is incredibly permeable while still able to provide a quality structural pavement. The use of pervious concrete pavement supports the many positives of infiltration technology, including both groundwater recharge and attempts to control increasing aquifer depletion. Because a picture says 1,000 words, I'd like to provide some visualization. Represented on the left is a sample of pervious concrete, such as this one with me today. You can see the moisture falling onto the top of the pervious concrete, immediately passing through and immediately coming out the bottom. The schematic on the right demonstrates how moisture falls onto a slab of pervious concrete, represented by the gray solid material on the top. The moisture is filtered as it moves through the concrete and then passes through the granular base reservoir, where it is temporarily stored before it is percolated into the subgrade, where in addition to providing groundwater recharge, it also provides substantial moisture to the root systems of surrounding vegetation as if no hardscape ever existed. This is a Sam's Club discount store parking lot in Atlanta, Georgia. On your left, you can see moisture accumulated on the surface of conventional asphalt pavement immediately following a rain event. On the same site, the photo on the right shows the pervious concrete slab that was later constructed, and you can see the comparison at the same time. This is a parking lot of a Walmart store in Denver, Colorado. In the background, you can see conventional asphalt during a rain event with the expected standing water in many places, while in the foreground is a test section of pervious concrete, which appears to show no effects of moisture at all. The Safeway grocery store on the left has a complete parking lot of pervious concrete and is shown as it looked on April 11th, 2005, the following morning after a 12-inch snowfall had closed the Denver airport. The parking lot was plowed the night before, and as soon as the sun appeared, most of the remaining moisture quickly melted and passed through the pervious concrete. The photo on the right was taken at the same time and represents the conventional pavement immediately across the street, which was later turned to ice when the sun went down, the temperatures dropped, and the moisture standing on the surface refroze. This is the parking lot of Finley Field at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. The aerial view shows pervious concrete, the white stripes or strips that you see there, surrounded by conventional asphalt. This shows just one means of using pervious concrete for water harvesting, as the moisture trapped in the granular base system immediately beneath the pervious concrete is pumped over to the pinkish roof building on the left, which was converted into a cistern. From the cistern, the water is used to water all the vegetation of the surrounding areas of the parking lot and the nearby baseball field. This building was built, or the project was built about 12 years ago and is still in very good condition. And finally, this is a pervious concrete street in Portland, Oregon, which demonstrates the ability to use pervious concrete also on roadways. I took a look at the street just the other night, Mr. Chairman, and to me it looked even better as shown in this picture. I can declare it as what we would project to be a 20 to 30 year pavement. Here you can see pervious concrete being poured onto a slab where the moisture is expected to infiltrate at a rate in excess of 200 inches per square foot per hour, which is typical of what we get with pervious concrete. NRMCA recognizes that sustainable development and environmentally friendly pavements technologies are about balancing human needs with the Earth's capacity to meet them. Concrete offers a wide range of capabilities to help achieve this balance. In particular, pervious concrete offers a compelling solution to the many stormwater challenges confronted by communities around the nation. NRMCA is a lead participant in the development of guideline specifications for the design and use of pervious concrete through its participation on the American Concrete Institute's technical committee focused on this technology. In addition, NRMCA sponsors a national program for the certification of pervious concrete contractors that is delivered regionally and locally and resulting in 1,200 certifications in the last 18 months. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'd be pleased to answer any questions you or any of the members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Huffman. Mr. Kassoff, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. My name is Hal Kassoff with PD, Parsons, Brinckerhoff, a global engineering consulting firm, and I also served for 12 years as state highway administrator in the state of Maryland. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. 5 years ago, while with PB, I was asked by a colleague who was leading a company-wide sustainability initiative for buildings and transportation whether I thought the case could be made for highways as a net contributor rather than a net detractor in terms of sustainable development. I took on the assignment and began researching, writing, and speaking about what I called sustainable highways, oxymoron or opportunity. I define sustainable highways as improvements which achieve better than before outcomes, not only for highway purposes such as safety, mobility, and structural integrity, but also for broader environmental and societal goals. While not as advanced in sustainable development as buildings and not as inherently sustainable as public transportation, there are several underlying reasons why the concept of sustainable highways is an idea whose time has come. The first is that an increasingly demanding and politically active customer base, the people we serve, want improved transportation and a healthy environment. They're not willing to sacrifice one for the other. Second is that over 90% of highway improvements are on existing rather than new facilities, a radical change from the recent era of interstate highway construction. This offers a unique opportunity to improve communities and the environment by virtue of a second generation of highway projects that must adhere to much more stringent requirements such as for air quality, noise, wetlands, water quality, endangered species, historic preservation, just to name a few. The third factor is that for the past 7 or 8 years, AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, has advanced the concept of environmental stewardship, accepting responsibility for the environment as affected by transportation improvements, perhaps even more importantly, seeking practical and affordable ways to enhance it. By actively promoting an approach to project development called context-sensitive solutions, AASHTO provides the single most important tool to fulfill environmental stewardship and sustainability goals. And more recently, AASHTO initiated a process to define and advance a vision for sustainable transportation throughout this country, with the assistance of a national panel of professionals, which I had the privilege and honor of chairing. A fourth factor is that sustainable highways makes good business and good economic sense. From several perspectives, on a project level, they contribute to economic efficiency, since context-sensitive and sustainable highway improvements are more likely to be supported and implemented much faster than less contextual and less sustainable alternatives, which are more likely to languish. Also, from a life cycle asset management perspective, investing in increased durability and preventive maintenance means lower life cycle costs, less consumption of resources, of non-renewable resources, and reduce economic losses to shippers and travelers who are delayed less frequently by repairs and reconstruction. And let's not forget the role of highways in an ever-expanding recycling industry, which is second to none. There are many opportunities for sustainable highway practices from the earliest phases of planning, where land use and conservation and transportation decisions can be better coordinated, and that's been encouraged by Safety Lou legislation, to technologies for fast-track construction, managing traffic, reducing the impacts during construction. These opportunities are articulated in a series of tools which we were associated with, a compendium of environmental stewardship practices in construction and maintenance, and a 30-page highway sustainability checklist which covers planning all the way to operations. These opportunities are underscored by the Cooperative Green Highways Partnership that you've already heard about from EPA and Federal Highways. Perhaps the greatest barrier to sustainable highways lies with motor vehicles that use these highways, and in particular the carbon footprint and related air quality and climate change issues that arise. A sustainable highways concept that ignores motor vehicle issues represents just part of the puzzle. Second barrier has to do with the land use decisions that can exploit and ultimately degrade highway service and the quality of life through strip development and sprawl. Problems, by the way, that Portland, Oregon, my two colleagues on the right, are noted for having overcome, and your home district. And I congratulate Portland in that regard. Finally, as a way to simultaneously induce as well as measure sustainability outcomes in infrastructure, we can apply a framework known throughout the world of sustainable development, but mostly outside the United States, as the triple bottom line, a framework to set targets, measure progress, and evaluate whether and to what extent the so-called better-than-before outcomes are indeed achieved as we pursue a robust economy, a healthy natural environment, and an enhanced quality of life, which we all certainly want. The triple bottom line has the potential to offer incentives and inducements to public as well as private sector decision makers to pursue sustainability strategies and initiatives without mandating the details of how to achieve these desired outcomes. I would strongly recommend research into the best ways to apply this triple bottom line tool in the United States. In sum, the goal of sustainable highways may at first sound like an oxymoron, but in reality represents an opportunity whose time has come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kassoff. Now comes the time for questions, and the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Commissioner Adams, you mentioned that there were several challenges faced by the City of Portland in implementing its Green Streets initiative. And I'd like you to line out or lay out for us what some of those challenges are, how the Green Streets Initiative would interact with existing stormwater management systems, and that if the Green Streets Initiative could have been fully implemented, what the impact would have been on stormwater runoff, both in terms of cost and effectiveness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, starting in 1994 and for a series of years, including up till the last 2 years that I've been Commissioner in charge of Transportation and Environmental Services, we have sought partnerships with the EPA on a number of green stormwater-related projects. And indeed, we have achieved some of those partnerships with EPA. But I would personally characterize the partnerships as the green transportation partnerships as, in addition to the normal requirements of the gray pipe solutions. So, for instance, our sewer retrofit, which is a $1.4 billion digging up of the sewers, big pipes, and everything else, when we asked them to supplement some of that gray pipe solution for some green stormwater solutions, they said no, and in fact used that as the impetus, one of the impetuses for a 6-year investigation of the city that's still open and ongoing today. So there is parts of EPA that I find to be interested in the partnerships around green stormwater, especially related to streets, and there are other parts of the agency where we have experienced quite the opposite. I understand the reluctance to put too much reliance on green stormwater solutions that don't have, the stamp of approval of the EPA, but I would hope that the most recent good words that we've heard from EPA on stormwater would have happened sooner.
Thank you. You referred in your testimony to an unclear regulatory environment and that there might be a long series of steps so that more municipalities or local jurisdictions would enact green streets approaches to stormwater. What are some of the steps that you think are necessary, and what are some of the clarifications from a regulatory perspective that you think are necessary to promote green technologies in stormwater treatment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I think a key issue is to get to those standards is to support a national program of research and development around green infrastructure technology, and specifically around green transportation stormwater technology. A national technology development program, I think, builds on the EPA's recent Green Infrastructure Statement of Intent and your congressional statement of support for green infrastructure. Local governments, again, need to know what the measures of success are. Mr. Grumbles talked about the EPA is not going to dictate the solutions, but we need to know what the measures of success are, the results that they're looking for, that we can then go after. The other is that the specific green transportation stormwater tools for Portland should and will be different than the same tools in other parts of the United States that have different terrain, climates, different weather patterns. So if the EPA would help work with local governments and state governments to develop some standards and approaches, they need to, in my opinion, based on the different kinds of terrains that exist in the United States. The other is, as mentioned by my fellow witnesses up here, and this is to really put some rigor to the costs and benefits around the green transportation technology. We would welcome that. We are seeing savings. There are parts of our city, like a lot of cities around the United States, where the existing sewer infrastructure, the pipes are too small, or where there is new development or an expansion of the city, where new pipes have to be laid. What we're experiencing is significant savings by not having to go in and put in bigger pipes, but implement green stormwater solutions that keep stormwaters out of the pipe. Therefore, we don't have to dig them up and realize significant savings in terms of cities expanding, not having to put the pipes in under the street in the first place to deal with that stormwater runoff from the streets. Saves. Again, we want to feel assured that what we're doing is with EPA's approval. standards, I think, are really key, and agreement among the federal, state, and local governments around some cost-benefit methodology is incredibly useful.
Thank you, Commissioner. My time has expired, but at some point in the future, if there are records of or estimates of what potential cost savings might be achieved, the committee would be very, very interested in that information. And with that, I turn to the ranking member, Dr. Gingrey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We touched on this a little bit before we had to break for votes, but this is, of course, extremely interesting testimony. And I think my question before was pertaining to best management practices dependent on the environment and where you are and how much rainfall, but not just the total quantity per year. I'm not really sure that Oregon gets that much more. Maybe Georgia's average rainfall is closer to 50 inches per year, so it's more. I think you said 37 for Oregon, but it comes in a different way. I'm sure we get a lot more thunderstorms, and you get a lot more gentle, steady rain that everybody likes to hear at night, particularly if you've got a tin roof on your house. But Florida and Georgia are a little bit different. And so I guess the point, and any one of the three of you can address this because you're Mr. Huffman obviously is in the business, and Mr. Kassoff in his testimony very knowledgeable about this as well. Different strokes for different folks, I guess, is what I'm talking about. I know we were recently in Hamburg, Germany, looking at all these windmills, and the discussion was, well, you know, this is great. This is Germans talking, German scientists, in regard to renewable energy sources, and they said, well, these windmills are great up here in Hamburg on the North Sea, but they wouldn't do a whole lot of good on the equator. Whereas the solar panels will probably be very, very efficient on the equator, but those windmills wouldn't get you a lot of bang for the buck. So it's this issue of best management practices depending on where you are, and clearly one size will not fit all. And if the federal government and our two previous witnesses, Ms. Shepard and Mr. Grumbles, of course, of the EPA and the Federal Highway Department, the bureaucracy tends to want to try to squeeze a one-size-fits-all mantra. Talk about that for us a little bit and how we can approach it. And Mr. Huffman in particular, the Pervious Concrete, I think is very interesting. The pictures of the slides that you showed, extremely interesting. And what does that do to the strength of the concrete? You know, the old traditional rock-solid concrete with rebars and all that stuff. And I'm looking at something I've never seen before. Maybe you can explain that to us and whether or not that would be applicable also to asphalt surfaces.
Thank you, Ranking Member Gingrey and members of the committee. As it relates to concrete and the one-size-fits-all, the bigger product area that is sometimes cast upon us relates to porous pavements generally. And within that, there's certainly a difference between pervious concrete and some other porous or pervious materials. For example, pervious concrete, like its counterpart on the asphalt side of the industry, takes large stone and sand from our conventional technologies of conventional concrete that is also used with Portland cement binder, which provides a very rigid binding material. We take the sand out and we create a void structure. The competing material, which is a petroleum-based product, which is frequently referred to by highway engineers as flexible pavement, uses asphalt as a binder. They have large rocks in their conventional product, and then they also take the sand out. So basically the products are much the same in terms of larger rocks and a binder with little or no sand. The benefits of concrete in that situation, especially to be distinguished from a competing material, is that the rigid binder is ideally situated or positioned to allow for a voided product with 15 to 30% void factors and stays rigid. And in respect to your question about strength, yes, it's true. As we take the voids out and allow for decreased density, the product does lose some compressive strength. We compensate for that by increasing the depth of the structure, typically by about a 50% factor. So on a parking lot, for example, typically a conventional concrete parking lot is 4 inches in thickness, and with pervious concrete, because of the decreased density, we increase the thickness to 6 inches. So that's the way the technology works.
Is it cheaper? And I'm not sure exactly how you measure it and how you price it, but is it more expensive? And I'm assuming the answer is yes, to put in your product for the long-term benefit. A lot of times you've got developers who are developing strip shopping centers and that sort of thing, and the cost is obviously a factor. Do you get resistance from that?
We get resistance because in first cost, certainly the use of a product like pervious concrete versus a conventional pavement material is going to be somewhat higher. The offset that greatly advantages the environment and the concept of using this is that because we will eliminate conventional stormwater detention on most applications, such as parking lots, we will actually save in the first cost of construction when you use a material like this. For that reason, many big box builders and major shopping mall developers, anybody building big parking lots, see this very favorably.
Ranking Member Grumbles, I would like to address your point about the one-size-fits-all issue in terms of how the government might approach this issue of sustainability and sustainable highways. First, I think we've all learned over the years that specifying outcomes, desired end results, and then leaving flexibility to other parties, states, local governments, private industry to figure out how to achieve those outcomes works better than specifying detailed methods, because we are such a diverse country and what works in one place doesn't necessarily work in another. And then extending that idea, and we've given an awful lot of thought to this idea of whether you could legislate or regulate sustainability into effect. In the highway business, and I sense that you have some familiarity with how that works, and Harold Lindenthal, your commissioner, is former president of AASHTO, by the way, and one of the leading transportation officials in the country. The principle that has been established for the past 20 to 30 years under NEPA, NEPA is actually older than that, but what had evolved is this idea that when impacts are created by transportation facilities, the first order is to try to avoid them, the second is to try to minimize them, and the third is with whatever impacts are minimally necessary, you must mitigate those impacts, which means a restoration idea, and it engenders an avoidance of harm and then a compensation for harm by trying to draw even. What sustainability, and that, by the way, has found its way into regulation, and it is appropriate. I like to use the term, if we create a mess, our obligation is to clean it up and fix it. But there's serious questions whether that approach alone will get us towards sustainability, especially since we've started with, as you point out, some damage to the environment just by the works we've accomplished over the years, which we're very proud of, but there have been these unavoidable impacts. The sustainability idea, founded on environmental stewardship, which is better than before, transforms the avoid negatives into create positives. And the create positives, I think, can come about through are more likely to come about through a series of initiatives and steps that the federal government can take other than regulation and hard legislation. It could be incentivized, for example. It can be recognized that as EPA region, the Mid-Atlantic region, has demonstrated through their Green Highways Initiative that through cooperation, you're much more likely to achieve a faster turnaround and a better end result than by just riding the minimums. So I think what we're looking for is performance outcomes rather than methods in the first instance, a level playing field for minimum requirements of avoid, minimize, mitigate, and then an incentivization through articulation of principles and policies right down to some form of recognition that by going the extra step, there are benefits to be achieved.
Thank you. Thank all of you.
I'd like to recognize Dr. Ehlers for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have to say, it really warms my heart to hear the testimony. Many years ago, when I was a county commissioner, I also chaired the County Board of Public Works. Tried to introduce the ideas of sustainability in a number of ways. Met tremendous resistance, particularly from the engineers, who said, you know, just another do-gooder trying to mess up our profession. Fortunately, I'm a physicist, so I could tend to argue them down sometimes, but not all the time. And also, Mr. Chairman, I have to note, since I am a scientist, I always try to correlate data I observe. And I've noticed something amazing about this committee. A very disproportionate number of the witnesses tend to come from Portland, Oregon.
It's because of forward thinking.
Yeah, I'm having trouble. I haven't quite determined the correlation yet, but I'll figure it out. I just want to comment. The examples you've given are primarily from Portland, and Mr. Gingrey talked about Georgia and so forth. But what about the frozen north? Michigan has a particular problem, and I'm from Michigan. We're even worse off than Minnesota and Wisconsin, which are to the west, because there it freezes and it stays frozen for 4 months and then thaws. Michigan, it freezes and thaws every couple of weeks. We have an incredible amount of freeze-thaw cycle, which really weakens our systems and leads to a lot of maintenance problems. How does pervious material work in a constant freeze-thaw cycle? In particular, if you have a roadway, get a lot of water in, it freezes very hard at night, and they stay that way for several days. What does that do to the permeable surface, or the pervious surface, I should say? Any comments?
I definitely have a comment, Congressman Ehlers and members of the committee. Thank you. The American Concrete Institute and other organizations have done extensive studies to determine the freeze-thaw durability of pervious concrete in particular. And we have mostly empirical data, but there are laboratories at universities across the country that are evaluating it also under laboratory conditions. And their findings are very supportive of its use for freeze-thaw durability climates. I can assure you that before major big box builders went into a city like Denver, which they claim to have more cycling than anybody in the country, but there's some other places that would make the same claim. They looked very carefully at this technology, and with their consultants, they determined that the data that we presented was sufficient, and it's been well proven in the field in a number of, in all applications that we know of, and after probably more than 10 years, at various locations around the country, we're not aware of any suspected deterioration anywhere due to freeze-thaw cycling with pervious concrete.
Have been used in Michigan?
I think on a very limited basis that would be driveways and sidewalks and such, nothing that would be a well-documented commercial application. Yeah.
I'll be very interested to see. Denver, in spite of the fact they claim everything, certainly has big swings in the freeze-thaw cycle, but they have far less frequent freeze-thaw cycles than the upper Midwest does. So, well, when you find some data or you find some people using it, I'd be very interested in the results if you encounter that sometime in the future.
Yes, sir.
That, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Huffman, let me follow up on that research and development question. And with respect to high traffic or high use areas, are there further areas of research that are necessary before permeable pavements are used? Because the examples that you showed earlier are very impressive. Those tend to be in parking lot settings. What about high use environments like highways?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There isn't yet enough data to support the use in highway applications in particular. It's the speed of traffic. It's not necessarily the loads that are carried in terms of 18-wheelers and such. We've actually been able to handle those loads in parking lot applications well with Pervious Concrete, but more study is definitely required relative to highways.
Thank you. And Mr. Huffman and Mr. Kassoff, are there some challenges in acceptance of this technology by builders and the construction industry? Are there further steps that need to be taken either in the public or private sector for faster takedown of these technologies?
The national organization that all of the state departments of transportation belong to, AASHTO, we've mentioned it several times, has a national testing program. Each state has its own laboratories, but they have a more efficient, integrated approach in recent years for industry to bring products for testing and evaluation. And I think as again, we look for outcomes and we leave industry with flexibility, the need for those testing programs is even greater. The mechanisms are definitely there. There's no question that more research into the hard technology is needed, as well as the application of the institutional framework of triple bottom line that we mentioned earlier. But yes, that would all contribute to advancing sustainability and infrastructure more rapidly.
Chairman Wu, thank you. I'd like to add that the major owners in private enterprise are generally supportive of this technology, and what happens is when they move down to the regional and local level, they very often are faced with regulators who just are not yet aware of the technology, in spite of the fact that it's an EPA best management practice for first flush pollution mitigation, and the EPA is very supportive. Many of these agencies don't have BMPs relating to low-impact development, much less pervious concrete, and as they transition in that direction, we'll expect that they'll find the means to become knowledgeable enough to be positively responsive.
So that local level of regulation is also very important in the takedown of this technology.
Absolutely, sir.
I would just add that in addition to regulation, I think part of what Mr. Huffman was talking about, and I would second, is education. It's a broadening of the horizons of what is possible, so that the engineers that Congressman Ehlers encountered in the future are engineers who are seeking out these alternatives and have places to go for reference to find that they do work.
Commissioner Adams, you showed me some residential developments which were truly outstanding, and the thoughtfulness with which they planned out the disposition and the flows of groundwater. Some developers do that. Some developers don't do that. What are some of the factors that go into that private sector developer decision, and what can we do to encourage more residential development that uses Green Street concepts?
I think Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we, in the local level in Portland, as I touched on earlier, we've been first doing our own research and development ourselves and the private sector that approach, stormwater approach works, public right-of-way or in the private sector. We also then regulate. We have a stormwater development manual that for new construction establishes that minimum amount of a minimum green stormwater approach to new development or major renovation of existing buildings. But then we also try to, we don't like to rely just on regulations and preferences to, okay. Our preference is to be partners with the private sector, and because it can be a win-win. When a developer develops in a manner that takes existing stormwater off the system, that saves us money either in the short term, because many of our pipes are 80, 90 years old and therefore inadequate or too small to handle the increased density of the city of Portland, and we will partner with them by paying them a portion of the cost to do a green stormwater development or treatment of their parking lots and of the development that they're looking at, because we actually make it back in savings over a very defined and pretty quick period of time. So in some ways we have actuarial sort of experience now with how much we can incent the private sector to do the right thing, and when the ratepayers, the city's ratepayers for the sewer agency actually will get that benefit back.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ehlers, further questions?
Just a few follow-up, then I think we'll all be wrapped up here. Mr. Kassoff, you've gotten off relatively free so far. I just wanted to pick your brain a bit, since you have a lot of background in state DOTs and ASHTO. And I'd like some idea from you about, first of all, what kind of barriers do you run into when advocating these new approaches? Can you also tell the committee about how these group efforts that we're talking about here play into the Green Highway R&D and implementation there?
I think the principal barrier is one of lack of awareness and in some cases leadership. When we have leadership that says we are going to be green and we are moving in the direction of sustainability, and we're going to challenge you, the engineers in our agency, to come up with different ways to achieve that, the juices start flowing. Actually, people move out of their comfort zone and create solutions. And we've seen case after case. Oregon is a state that is a leader in this regard. Washington State, New York, my home state of Maryland. So it's very much a cultural and leadership type of issue. And it is a matter of comfort zone. It's a matter of where the central tendency is. As a physician and you, as a physicist, I should say, you understand that if the central tendency is to just repeat what you've been doing in the past in your comfort zone, that's where you remain. But if the central tendency, because it's part of the organization's culture, is to experiment, to try, to fulfill a broader purpose, such as sustainability outcomes or green outcomes, then that's the way the engineers will want to move. Engineers are problem solvers, and I think they thrive on challenges. And just going back to the same old manuals and the same old practices, which don't achieve these new expectations, is not the height of engineering to most professionals.
My personal experience, most of the opposition came not so much from the engineers once they understood what is happening to the field, but from local government leaders who are afraid of headlines about this wonderful new project that came in 25% over budget, etc. And that's the big fear. And so it tends to spread rather slowly. But the best thing is to have success present papers at national conferences of National Association of Counties, the Municipal League, etc., and that then convinces them. I have no further questions, Mr.
Well, I thank you for that comment, and I'm glad that Commissioner Adams has had a platform to talk about some local successes. Unless Dr. Gingrey comes back from the floor in the next few minutes, or unless Dr. Ayers has any further questions, I only have one further inquiry, and that is for Mr. Huffman and Mr. Kassoff. What sources of federal support, if any, whether it's grants or technical assistance or other forms, have been of assistance to you in developing green streets technology and permeable pavement technology, and how can we adjust those federal efforts to be best supportive? And Commissioner Adams, if you want to take a shot at that, also you're very welcome to.
I'm not sure where I've seen the benefit directly from the funding, but what we do need, as Mr. Kassoff said earlier, is that it needs to be focused on education. And the primary barrier is just that people don't understand. The regulators are not necessarily taking negative positions. They're just not aware of the technology, and so the technology is unaddressed. So for an owner making a proposal for a project, he sees it as a challenge to the permitting process to be allowed to use any new technology, and it's just easier not to submit.
The Federal Highway Administration has a number of sources, and I have to say that in recent years they have been in tune with this idea of environmental stewardship and context-sensitive solutions, both of which are key components of what we're talking about here, green infrastructure. On the research end, they have supported research into this area. On the educational end, they work with universities. They have the Council of University Transportation Centers that they offer grants to. We'd like to see the universities picking up more on what we call context-sensitive solutions. Civil engineering programs around the country have definitely moved in the green direction since someone as old as I am went to civil engineering school. So that's been a positive development. But this idea of contextual design, that the one size does not fit all, and we have to achieve these sustainable outcomes by applying our most creative engineering tools. That is something that needs to be educated. Finally, in the regular federal highway program, the Federal Highway Administration, through initiatives like the Green Highway Partnership, is saying funding is available for this kind of thing. The Green Highways Partnership has adopted a pilot project, actually not 25 miles from where we're sitting. It happens to be US 301 in southern Maryland, a corridor in great need of some improvement. And that has now become the test bed for Green Highways and Green Highways Partnership to see if the state DOT, which in Maryland has been extremely progressive, EPA, which has been a leader in this regard, Federal Highways, who has put funding into this Green Highways Partnership and has been very supportive, and local governments, all in combination, and the private sector can make it work. So we are keeping our fingers crossed that we'll have a successful outcome in that regard. But they have made their funding available, and of course there is not sufficient funding overall to accomplish all of these objectives. That is for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Kassoff. And Commissioner Adams, you may have the last word if you so choose.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to, I think, reiterate some points that were touched on in your opening comments and that I sought to underscore in my testimony, and as well as been mentioned by the other witnesses. And the effort at green transportation infrastructure has really been in a research and development phase, piloting phase, and that's been very necessary. And what I hope happens is that we go from there to the strategies and the investment to make it a way of doing business. And in terms of local governments, what they really need to see from federal regulators is very explicit green lights that this is not just okay to experiment with, but this is okay to begin have as part of the way of doing business in managing the transportation system.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank all the witnesses for your testimony and also for your forbearance with the interaction of the committee schedule and the floor schedule. The record will remain open for additional statements from the members and for questions and answers to any follow-up questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. The witnesses are excused, and the hearing is now adjourned.